Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have mercury. Sometimes we really just need to take a second and appreciate the advancements of modern medicine. We might not know everything or have the best healthcare systems, but one thing we don't have to do anymore is give ourselves mercury poisoning because no one knew that existed. The use of mercury in medical care stretches back thousands and thousands of years. It was once used in ceremonies and has been used to treat skin conditions as well, and it's even found inside of the cups that were left in Egyptian tombs. It was even once used as a contraceptive and sometimes an aphrodisiac, and it was even used at one point to treat syphilis. So yeah, it's been used a lot, and it of course is still used, but in much safer levels. Mercury can cause deadly liver and kidney damage when too much is used or consumed. This is one medical advancement that we can definitely say improved our quality of life. In our number 9 spot today, we have self-mummification. This practice stems back years and years, but it is sometimes still practiced today, although it was outlawed in Japan in the 20th century. The practice of self-mummification is often done by monks as it was thought to preserve their holiness, but I suppose it can be done by anyone. It usually starts off with a 3-year diet that consists of seeds and nuts. During this, the person will also do exercises which are intended to remove the body of all body fat. This diet will eventually change to tree bark root and poisonous tea. This tea makes the drinker throw up, and the point of that is to remove the body of all the fluids, as well as making the body a less than great feasting option for bugs after death. The monk will then lock himself in a tomb in the lotus position with a breathing tube and a bell. The bell will be rung to signal he is still alive, but once he has passed, the tomb will be sealed up. This process seems a little grim, but it has proven to be successful for many monks over the years. In our number 8 spot today, we have death consumption. There are some cultures that had a practice of eating their dead. These rituals would of course have a lot to do with their beliefs, and in some places it was believed that the dead would be taken by soul eaters, and this ritual was done in an attempt to stop it. The first steps in this process would be to cremate the body. After this, they would grind up the biggest bones with a pestle and mortar, and from there they would have a base for food, usually a soup. If this practice was discontinued, it would be believed that the soul eaters would continue consuming everyone's life force until the whole world ended. So, while it might be strange or dark for us to think about doing this, the way we live must look pretty gruesome to the people who once believed this. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Tukam festival. This festival stems back to ancient times, but it was only recently banned by the Indian government. This festival used to take place in temples that are devoted to the goddess Kali, as it is meant to appease her. This ritual sees people being pierced with hooks and then hoisted up into the air on a frame, where they will then stay for a few hours. The people who were up in the air were carried around the temple a few times, while the others partaking in the ritual would dance. The blood that was spilled was offered to Kali. This is because this ritual is believed to calm her, as it is done to ensure she does not go off on a rampage, as she is both greatly respected and greatly feared. In our number 6 spot today, we have the Roman army regime. There's a reason why the Roman army was considered pretty invincible for so long. This is because of their insane training routines. Every single day during training, they would be expected to walk 18 miles in 5 hours and 21 miles in 5 hours while doing their fast-paced walk. Not to mention they did this all while carrying 20 pounds of armor and a 45-pound sack with their belongings. Being a soldier in the Roman army definitely had some perks, but at what cost? They may have been glamorized, but it certainly was anything but a glamorous career choice. In our number 5 spot today, we have urine taxing. Okay, so this one's a little weird and very gross. So plumbing is of course a modern invention, and at one point in time there just used to be public toilets, which seems like an absolute nightmare. Well, urine was used by ancient Romans as a chemical for tanning and laundry, which also sounds like an absolute nightmare. Because of this, urine would be taken from the public toilets and then bottled to be sold, and of course it was taxed. Imagine having to pay tax on pee. And imagine needing pee to do your laundry. All in all, I'm glad we have Tide Pods, and I'm happy to pay the tax on those, considering how much better that really is compared to what went on in ancient times. In our number 4 spot today, we have gladiator blood. While it wasn't extremely common for a gladiator hero to die in battle, when they did, it was all of the rage because of what happened next. It was once believed that gladiator body parts could help cure a variety of ailments. Why only gladiator parts? Well, I'm not exactly sure. The blood and livers were often used as a way to cure epilepsy, but if a gladiator hadn't died, his dead skin cells would be collected from a bath and used as a facial cream and as an aphrodisiac. aphrodisiac. I honestly don't know which one is worse. Well, I guess it's definitely drinking gladiator blood, but rubbing someone's dead skin on your face is a pretty close second. Once gladiator battles were outlawed, the sale of gladiator blood ended up being replaced by the blood of executed criminals. Trephination. This is a practice that can even be dated back to the Stone Age, so it certainly has quite a long history on Earth as it continues to be practiced today, of course in a much safer way. This is the practice of drilling holes in one's skull and was used to treat things such as seizures, mental disorders, and to relieve bleeding in the brain. In the Stone Age, it is believed that this was done by taking a sharp stone and scraping it against the skull in order to scrape away the bone. I don't know about you guys, but the idea of someone scraping away at my skull gives me a headache. What is extremely shocking about this is that evidence suggests that many of the people who went through these procedures thousands of years ago actually ended up surviving, some even surviving more than one procedure. It's crazy to think that people were already surviving brain surgery all those years ago. In our number 2 spot today, we have microdosing poison. Okay. This one's a little weird. Apparently, in ancient Roman times, it was normal for Roman rulers to take a small amount of poison each day. I'm sure you're wondering why, as would any sane person, and this is because it was believed that if they did this, they may be immune to it in the case of an actual attempted poisoning. While this is actually a pretty smart idea in theory, I'm not exactly sure if that's how poison works. It's not exactly like building up an immunity to a sickness, and how annoying would it be to take poison every day just to find out one day that your microdosing did not in fact do anything to protect you from this ill fate. I'm glad that this isn't a thing that has continued to be practiced today because it truly just would be a little weird. And I guess we have to worry less about being poisoned these days. Well, I guess not some people. Anyways, I digress. In our number 1 spot today, we have penalty of the sack. This is quite a dark practice that I had never heard of before, and it was used as a horrific punishment. This was a punishment used for someone who had been deemed guilty of patricide, which was one of the worst crimes someone could commit in ancient Rome. First, the person who's being punished would have their head covered with a sack that was made out of wolf skin, and then their feet would be covered with wooden shoes. They would then be beaten with rods that were blood-colored. After this, the person would then be thrown into a sack with other animals, such as a snake, a monkey, and a dog, and then the sack would then be tied up. Guys, this is extremely horrifying, but then they would throw the sack and all of the creatures inside into the sea or a river, which would obviously end in death. This is an unbelievably gruesome practice, and while there are many reasons I'm glad I didn't live in ancient times, being able to avoid these crazy types of punishments just might take the cake.
Starting off this countdown, we have the Vikings pillaged. If you know anything about the Vikings, then it's probably that they like to wear those pointy hats. I mean, I think that was the first thing that I ever learned about Vikings, and apparently it's not even true. Yeah, that was all a lie. They just wore normal hats. It's crazy how the world lies to you. But if that was the first thing that you learned about them, then the second thing would definitely be that they love to travel around and destroy everything. They would sail around on their big boats and be beating on a drum so that everyone could get into a solid rhythm. Then they would come up on your shore and just start hacking people to bits. The Vikings would come through and burn everything to the ground, hack your armies to pieces, steal all your goods, and then take off back into the ocean. If you were on the Viking end of this whole thing, it would seem like a pretty good deal. You just gotta hang around on a boat all day and then show up to a place you don't know, slaughter like a badass, get paid for it, and then take off back into the water. Minus the killing part, that's okay. And now, moving on to Olivia.
In our number 9 spot today, we have finger cutting. Before I dive into this one, guys, please don't forget to hit the thumbs up button if you're enjoying the video so far, because it really helps us out. The Dani tribe of Indonesia has a tradition that they have actually continued throughout the years, and although the Indonesian government has actually banned it, it is still believed to be practiced today. After a loved one passes away, everyone feels emotional pain, but women in this tribe will then turn their emotional pain into physical. It is a tradition for women to tie a string very tightly around their finger for 30 minutes. minutes in order to numb it, and then they will participate in the ritual of cutting off a segment of their finger. They will then burn or cauterize their new fingertip in order to stop the bleeding. This gruesome practice is done because this tribe believes that it helps keep the spirits of the deceased at peace, and for the restless spirits, it keeps them away. This practice is also said to be helpful in allowing physical pain to help the process of the emotional pain.
Coming in at number 8, we have they fought naked. I guess back in the day, ancient tribes didn't care if they were exposed while fighting. I personally would be scared, that things would get lopped off, but that's just me. This was something that was practiced by both the Vikings and the Gauls. So the Vikings, they would go around pillaging and also fight naked, and then the Gauls, they were the people to sack Rome for an 800-year period. So these guys were ruthless killing machines. And also pretty brave if they had all that on display.
In our number 7 spot today, we have fire walking. Have you ever run a bath that's too hot and then when you go to try and step in it, your feet are way too cold and it absolutely burns? This tradition is kind of like that, except way worse and a lot more painful. This is one tradition that has been seen in many tribes throughout history and is sometimes even still practiced today. Fire walking is basically exactly what it sounds like. Whoever is participating in the ritual will walk over either a bed of embers or stones that have been set on fire, which obviously makes them extremely hot. Since this is a practice throughout a few different tribes and cultures, there isn't one concrete reason for this, but the main reasons either consist of it being a gesture of respect towards their god, but it can also be a ritual that helps ward off evil spirits, or it can be done as a way to purify their soul.
In our 6th spot, we have they left behind the weak. If you were a baby that was being born back in ancient Greece, you better hope that you come out perfect. You better hope that when the doctor takes a look at you right after you come out screaming and crying, you better hope that you got all your fingers and toes, because they wouldn't think twice about keeping you around. If anything was off, then they would just leave you out in a forest. Some animal might turn you into a snack. But it was thought that commoners would scour the woods to find these kids to then take home. Not only that, but as soon as you were 7 years old, you would be taken into an intense environment of training, taken away from your family and forced to live with all other men who were becoming Spartans. If anyone showed any fear or weakness, the leaders training the men would get everyone else to gang up on them and encourage fighting. You had to be hardened at all times because back then the world was a much scarier place. Like imagine coming out and I'm not even gonna go there. Basically any sign of weakness and you were fought or they got rid of you.
In our number 5 spot today, we have scarification. In Papua New Guinea, there is a tribe called Kondengara, and this ritual is performed in order to strengthen the spiritual connection between the person and their environment. This ritual normally only involves men, and it starts off with adolescent men being isolated in what is called the spirit house for 2 months. After this period of isolation is over, they will then begin to prepare for their initiation ceremony. An expert will take sharp pieces of bamboo and cut their backs, which is based on the pattern of the skin of a crocodile. This is so that when the cuts heal, the scarring will be in this pattern because it is believed that crocodiles are the creators of humans. Since this is the ceremony that acts as the transition for young men to enter adulthood, this scarring is supposed to symbolize the tooth marks that were left by the spirit of the crocodile, which ate the body of the young boy and spit him out as a grown man.
And at number 4, they had warrior kings. Rolling off my last point of how much these people love to fight, they would see that knowledge of combat is one of the best traits to lead people. That's where the Hatti come in. They were one of the most dominant forces in the Bronze Age. They would cut down anyone who got in their way and they would take no crap from anyone. They had one of the largest empires of their time, and this was because of their love for violence and their respect for someone who knew how to fight. They would pick their king by someone who would be a great general, but also was successful in single combat. There would be many times when the king would fight with the army, which is pretty good. Even if you don't agree with all the bloodshed, at least those kings were willing to die for the cause. Because of this mentality towards warfare, this meant that everyone would start training on how to be the best warrior. They would start this training at an early age with aspirations to be king. So even if someone didn't get to be king, they would still be deadly with the blade. And that is how they were able to have such a strong army.
In our number 3 spot today, we have bullet ant gloves. In Brazil, there is a tribe, and they have one initiation tradition that I just truly cannot believe. Have you guys ever heard of bullet ants? If you haven't, they're obviously ants, but these ants are known for their incredibly powerful and painful venomous sting. The name bullet ant comes from the fact that these stings apparently have an equal amount of pain to that of being shot, so certainly an ant to stay away from. Anyway, this tribe has special gloves that are made with hundreds of bullet ants woven into it. The ritual consists of the person putting their hands inside of these gloves and leaving them there for 10 whole minutes. By the time their hands come out, they truly cannot move their hands, and it takes days for the pain to entirely go away. Doing this one time should be enough to show everyone how serious you are, right? Well, apparently not, because this tradition is repeated by the same person over 20 separate times over the course of months or years. I feel like I wouldn't even be able to do this once, but you definitely would not catch me doing this multiple times.
Coming in at number 2, we have the cannibal. Now, this wasn't all the tribes back in the day, but there were a few people that practiced
becoming dinner.
Archaeologists were able to discover this by finding caves where ancient humans were living. That's where they found remains that had bite marks through them. They believe that these were the remains of humans that were subjected to
becoming dinner.
And if food sources were scarce back then, you know they were eating each other.
In our number 1 spot today, we have human sacrifice. It may seem a little backwards, but human sacrifice was practiced by the Aztecs for many years as a means of survival. In Aztec mythology, Huitzilopochtli is the god of the sun, and he is constantly in a battle against darkness. If he loses, the world will of course end, and the idea behind the human sacrifice is that they will sacrifice their hearts in blood in order to feed him so that he can continue to fight the battle for light. It was also believed that if you sacrificed yourself in this way, it was not only a huge honor, but you would also have a very blessed afterlife. You would go on to fight in the army of Huitzilopochtli and help him win the battle against darkness.
Coming in at number 10, this list of maniacal rulers seems almost endless, but let's start off with King Leopold II of Belgium. Leopold reigned from 1865 to 1909, and he was certainly a busy boy. This was at the height of colonialism, so you can only imagine how bad things get from there. Leopold was in charge of what was called the Congo Free State and made it his own private property to do with as he wished. And that he did. It was entirely different from the typical colonial style, as Leopold established a brutal dictatorship on the land. He disguised his intentions by creating a philanthropic society called the International African Society. This gave him the government support he needed to hire mercenaries whose job it was to get as much money out of the territory as possible, by whatever means necessary. Ugh! Hate him. By introducing a system of forced free labor in order to extract the riches of the land, Leopold was responsible for causing the deaths of 20% of the population. In 1904, however, Roger Casement released a report unveiling the horrors of what Leopold had done, which led Leopold to surrender the Congo, though it remained part of Belgium into the 1950s. Ugh, like I said, starting off strong, am I right? Coming in at number 9. Now let's talk about good old King John, shall we? Not a nice guy, I must say. Surely when I said King John, you immediately thought of Robin Hood or Richard the Lionheart, or both. One is correct, Robin Hood actually wasn't associated with King John, but Lionheart was his brother. You may not have liked him in any movie adaptations, but man, he wasn't that bad. He was worse. Granted, medieval England wasn't a great place to live in the first place because everybody was stinky, there was bad health, you almost could die like walking down the street for no reason. But John's cruelty was almost unheard of. He killed his nephew, or made him disappear, but would more regularly enjoy starving his enemies to death. And did exactly that to the wife and son of his former friend William de Bruges. Unlike his brother, John was also incredibly cowardly and repeatedly showed his back to the enemy battle after battle. He also tried to seize the throne from his brother Richard the Lionheart while he was in captivity, which we know is part of the Robin Hood story, and so were the incredibly high taxes he made his people pay. The extortion, cruelty, and lechery that King John left in his wake makes him a perfect addition to our top 10 list. Coming in at number 8, we have Nero. I know he's technically not a king, but he's an emperor, and he was too nuts not to mention, so here we are. From burning Christians at night so they could light his garden, to kicking his second wife to death, the list goes on and on. He also killed his mother and brother in order to secure his throne, but what you may not have known was how he did some of his killings. A common form of punishment was having the criminal tied to a post and torn apart by animals. What Nero reportedly did to a woman named Lucasta, a woman his mother hired to kill his father and brother, will haunt your dreams. He had her assaulted by a specially trained giraffe before she was fed to the animals. Yeah, that's right, you heard me. A giraffe. Yeah. Nero was reportedly obsessed with this form of killing and even implemented it into his He would often dress up as a beast and have his array of lovers, male and female, tied to posts and pretend to bite them. I mean, that's technically not evil, like, to each their own, I guess, but as you heard before, there are plenty of other things he did to make it onto this list. Nero was an arrogant and narcissistic ruler. He even had his own crowd of people who followed him and cheered him on. Coming in at number 7, okay, I had to bring this guy up. We all know him. You've seen the movies, you've seen the TV shows, you've listened to the Broadway hit 6? At least I hope you have. That's right, we couldn't get through this list without talking a little bit about our good old friend, Henry VIII. And you can guess what we're gonna mention. If you can, you're ahead of the game. I'll lock myself out. Henry beheaded 2 of his wives and divorced 3, and 1 beat him to the punch and died in childbirth. Like most kings, Henry was desperate for a male heir, but his first wife, Catherine, could only give him a daughter, so he started wandering around. Unluckily for Henry, his one mistress did give birth successfully to a son, though he was illegitimate, so it didn't count. One of his most famous mistresses turned wife was Anne Boleyn, an ambitious courtier who promised Henry that she could give him a son. Well, they don't know what we know now, so, you know, who could blame her? So desperate to wed her, Henry reformed the church so he could divorce Catherine. But when Anne gave birth to a daughter, future Queen Bess, I might add, he was still hopeful she would give birth to a son, but a few stillborns later, he accused her of adultery and treason so he could get rid of her. That's inventive. Good job, man. The next wife he beheaded was Catherine Howard, one who he also accused of adultery and executed. I mean, I get it, sometimes marriages don't go the way you plan, but like chopping off their heads? Really? Damn, dude. Coming in at number 6, next up, we have Ferdinand I, King of Naples. Ferdinand took pleasure in the phrase, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. Man, this guy is nuts. The key word here being pleasure. Apparently, the court of Naples had a lot of hope for Ferdinand when he took over, showing much promise as a ruler. He was intelligent, courageous, confident, but unfortunately, his rule soon turned malicious. But like our good friend Vlad the Impaler, as we'll talk about later, he liked to invite his enemies over for dinner, then imprison them and throw them out of windows. But once they were deceased, he missed them too much, so he had them embalmed and dressed in clothing they wore while they were alive. Then he placed them on display in what he called his Black Museum, kind of like that episode of Black Mirror, and would sometimes go in there and just, you know, admire them. But if he suspected any of his subjects were going to betray him, he would invite them into his museum so they could see what might happen if they do betray him. He even had some of the bodies propped up like they were eating at one of his fine banquets. Sounds like a great party, Ferdinand. Yeah, love that. Whew, keep going. It's just creepy, man. Coming in at number 5, next up we have King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia, who actually died only in 2015. Abdullah reigned for 5 years and violated so many human rights, that's pretty much all he's remembered for. Anyone who said anything against his rule or the royal family would be tortured and sometimes even put to death. He even sentenced a blogger to 1,000 lashings publicly and 10 years in prison for setting up a website and insulting religious authorities. He also considered anyone who deviated from the religion of the state to be enemies and in most cases literal terrorists. The blogger is just one example of the 1,000 political prisoners who have been arrested and tortured just because they asked a question. King Abdullah died in 2015 and his reign remains a controversial one, as he did also try to negotiate peace in the East, but many will always remember his medieval ways of torture and imprisonment in the modern day. Coming in at number 4, we have Olaf Tryggvason, the King of Norway. If you love shows like the Vikings, then it may interest you to learn the brutal ways of Olaf Tryggvason, the King of Norway. Now, we all know a lot of our ancestors weren't the cleanest, or anywhere near the kindest. Brutal murders were commonplace, while with pillaging and plundering being part of the job. But even people who were used to being covered in blood feared this man. The King of Norway wasn't afraid to slay pagans or anyone else he deemed as a traitor, even killing a slave who assassinated a rival for him. What the heck is that? But the most infamous of all of his murders was also the most brutal. Raud was a determined pagan and dedicated follower of Thor. Olaf forced a live snake down the man's throat and chased it with a red-hot poker, forcing the snake to dig out of Raud's neck, killing him. I can't even say that. I can't even say that. Whew, man, what a way to go. He then viciously dispatched his followers, stole his gold, and kept only those who would be baptized. If you weren't scared of snakes before, have fun getting that image out of your head. And I spoiled this before, oops, didn't mean to, but here we are. Okay, coming in hot at number 3. Before I do, remember if you like this video, give it a little thumbs up. We appreciate it, it's amazing. Coming in at number 3, we have Vlad the Impaler. Of course he's on this list. Did you think I wasn't gonna include him? Okay, the question remains, what didn't this crazy monarch do? I mean, let's be real. This ruler was so cruel that he established a legend about himself that inspired the tales of Dracula. To earn a name like Vlad the Impaler, he must have been really good at one thing: impaling. His father, Dracul, which means dragon in Romanian, and the rest of his family were brutally murdered in a coup, and some historians suspect that this, along with his abusive childhood trapped with the Turks, were the catalyst for a bloody rule. Vlad took the name Dracula, which means son of the dragon, but I think we know that name for another reason, and plotted his revenge. One of the first things he did was hold a banquet for all of his rivals in the guise of making peace. What they didn't know was that he would be the only one dining. His guests were soon stabbed to death, and those who remained alive were impaled on stakes, all while he sat and enjoyed his dinner. Some even say he drank their blood when his wine was empty, so you can see where that legend comes from. Beyond impaling though, he was also one of the first kings to use chemical warfare by sending those infected with deadly diseases to mingle with soldiers on enemy camps. For those of you who love like Twilight and like Vampire Diaries, man, this paints a very bad pictures of vampires. If they weren't bad already. I don't know. I like them too. I get it. Coming in piping hot at number 2. Okay, this one was almost number 1. I feel like this one and number 1 are kind of tied because they're both brutal. So here we go. We have the one, the only, Genghis Khan, ruler of the Mongolian Empire. This guy killed so many people and is recorded to have killed 1.2 million people in a single battle. Just one of his battles. Reports even say that he killed so many people their bones became mountains and that the soil became oily from the rotting corpses. Genghis Khan was supposedly responsible for over 40 million deaths. If you need a number to compare that to, that's the same amount of people who died in World War I. Also considering the massive amount of he committed, it is estimated that around 16 million people are descendant from him today. Khan had a brutal upbringing which turned him into an even more brutal man, and he killed his half-brother for not sharing food with him at just 10 years old. He was also horrendous when it came to torturing his betrayers. Some ways include pouring molten silver down their throats and sawing people in half. I can't even say that with a straight face. He also held mass beauty contests, and all those who didn't win would be given to his soldiers. Oh, and he killed 75% of the population of Iran, and he tried to commit an entire genocide. Guys, the list goes on. I'm not even done, but I don't have time in this video to talk about everything he did. And also, I feel super disgusting even talking about him, so let's move on, shall we? Okay, we're arriving at the number 1 spot. This next guy was so bad, he got named after it. Ivan the Terrible was one of the most horrific rulers in history. This guy is probably what would have happened if Joffrey or Ramsay actually became king. In 1543, when Ivan was just 13, he ordered the capture and arrest of fellow Prince Andrew Shusky and had him fed to ravenous dogs. Does that remind you of GOT? Because it does for me. There were also sure signs that he was a psychopath, as he often delighted in killing small helpless animals for fun. Priests begged him to repent and reform the corrupt ways of the government, and for a while he did. When he was married to his wife Anastasia Romanova, reportedly they were happy for 13 years before Anastasia fell ill and passed along with her son. The king then flew into a depressive wave, and his reign became as treacherous as you could imagine it would be. Ivan formed the Operniki gang, a league of men dressed in black robes who rode black horses and spent their time killing anyone they deemed traitors under God. They even barged into churches and killed priests if they felt they needed to. Ivan was also a sadist and subjected the men and women to horrendous sexual torture within and beyond the walls of the palace. But then, flip a switch and the events would cease following an extended self-induced repentance period. He would repent so hard sometimes he'd punish himself by throwing his head against a wall. Everyone feared him. Ivan married a sum of 8 times, killing some of his wives by drowning and sending others to convents. Even his eldest son, who he loved, was beaten to death by the very hands of his father. Oh my god, this is the same thing as number 2, which is honestly why I think like they match. It's like a tie for number 1. There was so much to say about Ivan the Terrible that he just had to be on this list.